Okay, so these are going to be our notes on the physical geography of Alaska. And before we start taking the notes, I want you to think about what are the landforms that shape our state. Think about, if you were to look at a map of Alaska, what are some of the features that you would see? So take a minute. Go ahead and stop the video, and then we'll see how many that you could list. So just take a minute to do that. Okay, hopefully you took time to do that, and let's list some of these out. See if you had any of these, and then we can go on with the notes. So if we were going to just list the general features of Alaska, we would probably say one of the ones that most people know, or most people would say about Alaska, one is mountains. So lots of mountains in Alaska. And the one most people know is Denali, and that's the Alaska Range. Where we live is the Wrangell, some of the tallest mountains in North America, but we also have the Chugach and the Brooks Range. Another feature of Alaska is tundra, and this is just an area where low vegetation, no trees, lots of berries and so on. You might say glaciers, really common feature of Alaska, and then maybe coastal areas where right along the coast, Alaska has the most coastal area of any state in the U.S. by far. I think if you take all the other coastal areas, add them up, they wouldn't be equal to Alaska. So let's look at some of these important regions and features in Alaska. One thing I want you to remember is about where we are. Okay, a lot of times we live here, we don't really think about where we are in relationship to the rest of the world. But we have a huge connection to something called the Arctic Circle. And the Arctic Circle is 63.5 degrees north and above latitude. So if we look at a picture of that, so we can get that. And here we are. I'm just going to leave those notes up there. But you can see here's Alaska. You can see this colored in region here. That's the Arctic Circle and above. You can see it's almost a half of all of Alaska is within the Arctic Circle. So we live in a place that's really cold, and you look at some other places, Russia is connected somewhat to it, Canada, not as much as in relationship to proportion as we do, but this really shapes our geography. So then if we go back to our notes and continue, so the first one we're going to look at is, go back here, get out of that, maybe not, okay, is, I'm going to erase this, is the Arctic Coastal Plain. Okay, and a lot of this area is also known as something called tundra, and we kind of talked about that at the beginning. Low vegetation, shrubs, willows, okay, berries, okay, just really low. They have tussocks, but generally you don't see any big trees or really large vegetation. Okay, and then it also has something called permafrost, and permafrost is just a mix of dirt, water, etc. So it's just the soil plus a little bit of water, and then it's so cold there because it's near the Arctic Circle that it's frozen all the time. So then that means that there's constantly this block of ice that exists just below the surface of the earth there, if you live there. and it tends to be very wet because you see many lakes and ponds. And if you've ever gotten in a plane, like in a place like Nome or Kotzebue, and flown in over a place like that, you just look down, it's nothing but water. It's either rivers, ponds, lakes. Now there's some areas that don't have water, but most of it does. And that's because the water can't absorb in due to permafrost. We have some permafrost here, it's just in patches. Up there it's just one solid sheet of permafrost because it never gets a chance to melt. Okay, so, and this also borders the northern coast of Alaska. So if we were going to look at that, we'll take just a second to do that. So if you go back to that, I'm going to get out of this so you can see it real quick. Okay, so this kind of gives us a picture of it. I'll bring this map down here. But here's your Arctic coastal plain, just this small area right here. It borders something called the Northern Slope and then the Brooks Range. So if we come back to our notes, so that's the Arctic coastal plain. And again, it borders the Northern Slope. So our next area is the Northern Slope, and this just is the area between the Arctic coastal plain, which is talked about, and the Brooks Range, which is a mountain range within Alaska, the northernmost range in Alaska. Okay, and this just is the area that slopes from the Brooks Range down to the coastal plain, and very important to Alaska because of the oil production here. Let me just clear these. Okay. So Alaska Revenue, the PFD, the Permanent Fund. So everybody gets a certain amount of money every year because of this oil production from the North Slope region, Dead Horse, up in those areas where oil is extracted. And we don't have taxes here and those kind of things because of all the money we get from the oil. Okay, but that's the North Slope. The next area is the Brooks Range, and this is the, again, farthest northern mountain range in the Arctic. It also contains a national park called Gates of the Arctic, and you can drive to this. You can fly to it if you want as well, but you can use the Dalton Highway to fly up here, or you can use the Dalton Highway to drive up there. Beautiful place, goes through these mountain ranges, lots of wildlife. Just a beautiful place. Everybody that lives in Alaska should take time to go see it. But also an important feature of the Brooks Range is it divides. It's a watershed that divides the Arctic Ocean waters from the Yukon River waters. So, you know, one side of those mountains, all the water is flowing to the Arctic Ocean. On the other side, it's all flowing to the Yukon River. Okay, so let's erase that. Keep going. So our next one is the Yukon River. This is the 4th longest river in the United States, and just really important to Alaska. Many villages along this river. Important resource for salmon, especially king salmon. Many of the rivers up north have lost much of their salmon. Even I lived in a place, Selawik, the Kobuk River. They get some salmon, they get pinks, but not like the reds and the kings that we get here. But the Yukon River is under much investigation because I don't understand why the king salmon seem to be dying off and the runs are getting less and less, which is a common thing around the world actually. But so much study going on to the king salmon. If you've ever had king salmon from there, it's a little different than the king salmon. It tastes a little different. When you fry it up, it's really oily compared to this king salmon we get in the Copper River. So a lot of worries about the king salmon run there in the Yukon River, but you know, really important to transportation and many native communities that live along there. And this empties into Bristol Bay, just a huge fishery. So now on to our area, the interior. This is where we live, and in this area you have the Alaska Range, which is Denali. Some really rugged mountains up near Cantwell, those places. This is all interior, Paxson, those kind of places. But what's really unique about here is the really cold winters we have here. So you've lived here long enough, you know we get to -40, even all the way up to -60 degrees Fahrenheit. Really, really cold. That's the winter. But in the summer, it can go up to 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So you have this difference almost of 140 degrees. Okay, difference. That's a huge difference. And I can remember one year it was like 50 degrees on one day, and it dropped within 2 days or so down to 40 below. So just a big difference can happen here. But also in the interior we have dry summers, and we're bordered everywhere by mountains. That kind of controls our weather. We don't get the rain we could get, other places get, because of those mountain ranges protecting us, and much of the rain getting dumped on one side of the mountain and we never see it. But we just do not get a lot of rain here. If you've ever lived anywhere else, even like Juneau, they just get tons of rain. They're on the other side of the mountain than us, or the other example. But really important as well is we live in a taiga, which is like a type of forest where it's just spruce trees, moose, and very little else. We have some caribou, but it's really hard to survive in these extreme temperatures that we live in. Not a lot to eat, not a lot of people, so we tend not to see much diversity here. Very little diversity in the interior. So let's keep going here. So then if we look at the next 3 more to go, we have actually 2 more. We have Alaska Peninsula, and this is the arm that extends to the Aleutians, includes the Aleutian Islands. And what's really unique, they have volcanic islands. You don't see that everywhere. We live in a state that has, the tallest mountain ranges, has volcanoes, and they also have something called an island arc. So if you ever look at the islands of Alaska, they have this arc shape to it, this curved shape to it, and that tells us that that's a plate boundary. And really what it tells us even more is it's one plate is going underneath the other. So we have 2 plates meeting, one here, and it's a subduction zone actually. I'm going to put a name to it. One subducts underneath the other, and whenever you see that happen, these islands can form at arcs. So if you look on anywhere on the globe, if you take a globe and just check out all the islands, anytime there's an arc, you can be sure that there's one plate going underneath another. As one plate goes underneath, gases get pushed up and they form these islands. But that's Alaska Peninsula. A lot of people go to Katmai National Park there for bear viewing, really good fishing there. Not a lot of people, just kind of like here, but a little bit different climate. So the last place is the Inside Passage, and this is Southeast Alaska. It's that small little panhandle. You have the state, major portion of the state, and then you have the Aleutians off like that. Then we have this little section, this section right here. Okay, looks like an octopus with 2 legs or something. But so this panhandle, this is Southeast Alaska. Find the state capital there, Juneau, and really dotted by very breathtaking and unique scenery with glaciers, fjords, rainforests, and mountains. Just the same mountains that we have here extend all the way down into the southeast. But fjords, if you're not sure what they are, they're formed by glaciers that receded. It used to be that the earth was a lot colder, sea level was lower. So these glaciers extended out much further than they do now, and as a glacier moves, it takes the soil and the crust with it. When it recedes, it left this big channel, and when sea level came back up as the earth warmed and water was melted and added to the oceans, those oceans then filled in where the glaciers were and formed these waterways in the Southeast Alaska. And if you've ever been there, they call it the Inside Passage. We'll look here in a minute, but also there's rainforest, lots and lots of rain, and just these huge trees and lots of green there, just constant rain. And if we look at this, I just want to show you this map and we'll be done. No, I think it's this one. Let's go there. Let's get out of this. Okay, so let's see if we can go to it real quick. So there's the map, and you can see all these little waterways. There's Glacier National Park. There's Juna right there, Auk Bay, all these different, you've probably heard a lot of these places. Gustavus, Hoonah, there's Sitka, Petersburg, there's another national park, Prince of Wales Island. You can see there's all these little waterways that were formed a long time ago by glaciers. Then you have Ketchikan and so on, but you have lots of little waterways in here. Here you have over on the far east, you have where those rainforests would be, even on some of these islands as well. Okay, so that's kind of the regions. Just to review real quick, again, we have the Inside Passage, just the panhandle of Alaska, from the state capital, but glaciers, lots of just amazing topography, fjords and rainforests, just lots of green. Okay, Alaska Peninsula with the volcanic islands, the island arc, Aleutian Islands, the interior, just really cold winters, dry summers, the Taiga, and then Yukon River, Brooks Range, largest mountain range above the Arctic Circle, North Slope where we get our oil, and the Arctic coastal plain. So that's your notes.